Crouse.
I wanted to ask you about one thing that I read that you said after a screening of it in Sundance, and you said, this movie is morally indefensible. Tell me what you meant by that.
Well, it is kind of. I mean, I constantly think of what the Christian right would say about this movie. I think that it pushes boundaries, and I think it pushes boundaries that we're uncomfortable to push, and I think that the best movies in this genre, that's kind of what they do. And I think that generally I'm not a fan of this kind of genre because I feel like the risks that people like David Cronenberg, took, from the beginning are not often taken. And so when I love a movie in this genre, I absolutely love it. And I felt that way when I read this script. I was just so astonished at its courage. And at times that courage is questionable. I mean, I think it goes to places that you don't necessarily want it to go, and it makes you really uncomfortable. And again, I sort of feel like that's what, interesting art does a lot of the time. It doesn't always have to do that, but it's pretty great when it does.
Well, for me, I was trying to figure out how I would explain this movie to people without giving anything away, right? Because there's a lot of sort of twists and turns, and you don't want people to know too much about it going in, because then the great pleasure of the movie is kind of ruined. So I was kind of thinking, well, if I was to describe it to people, I'd describe it as kind of a mix of Mummy Dearest and Frankenstein.
That's actually pretty good. I would say there's a pretty large dose of Freud at his most horrifying in there as well. And I think, one of the things that really drew me to the film is when I was reading the script, every time I got to a place where I thought, oh my God, can you imagine if this happened? But thank God it won't, because it's a movie and they'll never do that. Right. It happened 10 pages later, and I was like, what kind of psychopath will make this film? And so I was just sort of excited to see where it was going to go and how it was going to possibly work. And in the middle of it, I think, is this amazing character that I think so rarely gets written for women, like someone who's this kind of driven and single-focused and ambitious and deeply flawed and deeply complicated and super tough. And I'd never played anyone like that at all, so that was kind of exciting too.
Well, it's interesting. I just was working on a story about Amanda Peet, and she had said in one of her interviews somewhere, someone had asked her about the story arc of her character, and she said, it's a female character in a Hollywood movie. There is no story arc. What do you think?
I admire her so much for saying that. That's amazing. Yeah. Good for her.
Yeah. She said, I'm a bad girl, and that's what it is. That's what my character is.
She's a genius. Because it's weird. I was just, in thinking about doing this junket today, and you're my first, so I'll actually have things to say and, be honest in some way before I get completely deadened into the, repeating the same stuff over and over again. But I was thinking about, this morning and last night about how do you do a junket like this and how do you promote a film like this and not be unbelievably bland and boring when you do it. Because the truth is, someone pointed out to me yesterday, I was having a coffee with someone, and someone said, have you ever heard anyone ever say anything other than, I love the director, I love my co-stars, it was a fantastic experience? And you kind of want to go, well, it makes sense to say that, and, on this movie that was pretty much the case. But there's some sense in which you feel like, what is the point of listening to actors talk about their experiences on a film, because you don't really get anything more complicated than that. So I love the idea that she kind of broke with that, and I'm sure got in major crap about it from, the publicist and the distributor and the producers, to just say, this is formulaic. I played this. It wasn't that interesting. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because when you do these interviews, I know from my experience, I've written a few books, and I do, sometimes I'm the interviewee. Interviewer, I'm the interviewee. And when you do 30 interviews in a day about the same thing that, people haven't read the book, or they haven't, they haven't thought about it, they're asking the same questions. And I know what a sort of deadening kind of process it can be. But I remember doing interviews for a movie called Punch. One time it was a Canadian film, I think out of Halifax.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, about female boxing.
Yeah.
And the director, And God love him, he was like, you know what? I didn't get to do the things I wanted to do in this movie. And it was the most absolutely honest interview I've ever done with anybody, because so often, you're right, it's just the same kind of platitudes that they're throwing out. I loved working with him, it was so much fun, and we laughed, and I know. And so when I read
then the choice becomes, you're either going to be boring or grumpy. You know what I mean? Like, there's got to be a third way.
Let's find it right now.
I know.
Let's find it right now. Tell me a little bit about the character then. You described her briefly just then. I loved her because I thought that she was something that we don't normally see in genre movies, you know, and this is a genre film. It's a sci-fi horror. I'm sure there's another genre mixed in there somewhere that's escaping me right now. But she's often, it's not a genre that's known for really strong female characters. And so tell me a little bit about the character, and was she written that way when you initially got the script, or did you bring something more to it?
No, I have to say that the character was so fully fleshed out on the page. There was not a lot to be work to be done with this character, other than try to honor what had been written. And at times, I think in the film, I do, and at times I think I fall short, because the character on the page was like the greatest female character ever. And you know, there are moments where I think I rise to the occasion of the writing, and other times where I don't feel I do. So there, I'm being honest. There, but I did think it was exceptional to see a female character like this in this kind of genre, who's so smart and so quick, and so full of strategy, so capable of manipulation, such a driving force. I mean, there's almost something slightly Lady Macbethish about her, I think, and the way she kind of is pushing Clive to go to places that he might feel uncomfortable with.
Both morally and ethically.
Exactly, yeah. What's the difference between morally and ethically?
Well,
let's talk about that.
Let's talk about that, because as I said it, I think I'm just saying the same thing twice. But it's
I don't
early.
know who you are, though. I'm certain there's a really...
Well, I think ethically, I mean, morally, if you talk about morally, I think morally the idea is, I mean, you're dealing with something like, are we creating something that has a soul? Are we? I tend to think of morally as having a more kind of religious kind of feel to it. Whereas ethically, you know, when you're a doctor, you have to figure out, okay, should I give care to someone who's going to die in a week anyway, or should I, you know, it's the Hippocratic Oath. That, I think, is ethics, and morals, I think, is a larger kind of more humanistic approach to it.
Okay. Cool.
That's what I'm thinking.
Thanks for that. But yeah, no, I think she is somebody who wants to push every boundary to see her own sort of visions realized. And I think like many people who are extremely ambitious and extremely productive and extremely tough and able to sort of negotiate their way fiercely through the world, I think she's running away from an incredible amount of pain. And I think that's another thing that I think is interesting, is that she's made, you know, she's not left two-dimensional.
Richard Crouse.